And that is only because we don't understand the beauty of that kind of pattern, including its so-called limitations. The limitations are not disadvantages. Actually, they point at the gifts, the unique gifts that we naturally have.
All right, y'all, I'm here with Dr. Shai, and I am so excited about this conversation. And as I mentioned to him before we started recording, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you know I love talking about the chakras, and we talk about the energy centers a lot, but this is a totally different perspective and a totally different take on the chakras. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this chat.
I'm so happy to be with you today.
Yes. Okay. So just as maybe a little refresher, and then for you to just kind of put your spin on this. Again, I know those who are listening are familiar with me talking about the chakras, but I want to hear it from again, you have a different perspective. So can you just give maybe a brief explanation on what the chakras are, but then how you look at them a little bit different?
Yes, well, to start with simply what chakras are. Mm-hmm. Yes, so well, I would say that the chakras are an important, a crucial component of our energetic system, of what can be termed our subtle body, the body within the body. And the chakras are a sort of a main energy center or main energy confluences that reside just in the middle of this entire very complex nerve-like system. And although it is primarily energetic, and as such it has immense influence on our energy and life force and our physiology, chakras also have enormous implications for our mental health and psychological development, and of course spiritual transformation.
Yeah, no, I love that explanation. And so your work is kind of this, and I have this show, if you're watching this on YouTube, this is his book. His work is about, Dr. Shai's work is about connecting this to your soul design. And we talk about design a lot on this too, because I'm huge into human design. So we talk about this, but yours is a different perspective. And it's about your personality and tying in your personality and kind of your purpose into the chakras. So I'd love for you to kind of break that down a little bit, because I know in your book you talk about there's like the identity and fulfillment part, and there's like the purpose part. And so looking at the chakras through that lens, how does this play into our personality and our purpose?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, a great starting point. Well, first of all, imagine that we have, each of us has, of course, this is the most widespread kind of count. Each one of us has 7 chakras, 7 predominant chakras, 7 energy centers, and these are universally valid, and each of us somehow needs to develop all these 7 chakras and their themes and their energy potential and spiritual potential and emotional evolution. But what I've come to discover as a result of decades of researching into the topic of chakras was that each of us also has 3 major chakras that are, let's say, more energetically occupied or intense, and that's for a good reason. Sometimes we think that we feel some energy center because it's I don't know, it's unbalanced or it's excessive, but really in a more fundamental level, there are 3 chakras that are like, we can say their radiance, their intensity is greater, and that is for a very good reason. This is because we have a certain innate design, a blueprint that I would say that is the closest to what, if I may use that term, soul, our soul design, our soul's journey. So these three chakras, so first there is the primary chakra. The primary chakra, chakra personality, is related to our essence. And as such, it is deeply connected to our deepest passions, what makes us feel most alive, what is truly our authentic self, and what we really need to pursue in this lifetime if we ever want to experience a sense of happiness in the sense of meaning in life. And then there is the secondary type, and the secondary type is all about how we can fulfill ourselves in the world. What is our ideal form of expression? It's, in a sense, it's like our vehicle for expression in the world. And the two are sometimes harmoniously aligned, and sometimes they have this kind of inner quarrel. Maybe we'll talk about it. I have that. And then there is the supportive chakra type, which is all about what empowers me to do what I'm supposed to do in this lifetime. What is my deepest source of nourishment, that kind of energy that by tapping into it, I can feel nourished, empowered, enhanced to be able to embrace my challenges and my highest purpose.
I love this so much. Okay, so assuming that, so these three chakras, these are going to differ for everyone. So how do we discover which of these three chakras are those like for us, for you?
Yes, that's what I love about chakras, because about the chakra types, that unlike let's say numerology or astrology, where you just insert your numbers, your birth date and so on and so forth, and then you immediately get a sort of a produced answer depicting who you are or who you're supposed to be,
right?
And that is all. With chakra types, it's a very exciting, sometimes challenging process of self-discovery. It needs to be a gradual process, because you need to dig your personality type beneath all the social layers and social adaptations, and how you've shaped your personality as a result of all sorts of defense mechanisms or ways of pleasing others. So what we need to do for that first, and the book, by the way, contains the whole process, so it is completely self-contained. You don't need to look for some practitioner, instructor, or whatever. So first of all, there is a questionnaire, a quiz, and this 25 question quiz helps you first of all identify your primary chakra type, because that's the most important thing. If you discover your primary type, you found the crux, the center of gravity of your being, around which everything else revolves. It's like the sun of our around which our planet revolves.
Right.
So that's the most important. For this, we need to begin to become attentive to our unique experience of life. What makes us feel truly alive, how we love most spending our time, how we come into contact with the world. Is it through our intellect, our observation, or is it through our emotional system, our heart, or is it through our feeling center, or through our body? What do I do when I have an emotion, a negative emotion? How do I embrace it or face it or perhaps suppress it? So that's the number one, the quiz. The quiz is fundamental. And then there is evaluating the presence of each of the personality types in percentage. So for that, I need to read, and that's a very enjoyable process, because it's not just about you. while reading, you think of your partner, your parents, your children, your friends, your colleagues, your bosses, and so it's very exciting, sometimes about even politicians, and you think, oh, that seems to be just like me, or not like me at all. So I need to give a certain percentage evaluation, and sometimes we find one personality type which we identify as 100% ourselves. And that is really feeling at home. And sometimes people begin to cry because they feel so touched by this kind of self-recognition that gets them closer to that precious experience of self-love. You see, because sometimes everyone tells us love yourself, but we don't know what exactly we're supposed to love. So it's when we get in touch with that most vulnerable, most beautiful, essential soul passion that we have inside us. So these are the two primary techniques, and then there are writing practices that help us identify our what I call primal narrative. Primal narrative is a very exciting notion. It's all about discovering what my main friction with life is. Because each of us has a certain narrative we choose to tell about our life, about our experiences, what we prefer to remember. And that is actually an important key to discovering your primary type. So these are just examples. Of course, the book itself is full of practices, because that's what it's all about. It's supposed to first help us identify that kind of interplay of three chakras, and then begin to use that to make use of that treasure for the sake of answering, resolving all kinds of dilemmas, understanding ourselves, balancing ourselves, loving ourselves, fulfilling ourselves. That's it.
I love it. And I love what you said. You said it so beautifully, that like using this as a tool for self-love. And, you know, I have to say, when I found human design, and I've talked about this on the show before, that was how I felt when I discovered human design. You feel so validated. It's like, this is me, and I understand myself in this totally different level, in this totally different way. And I think, like you said, I think we have a hard time with that word self-love, and it sounds a little like fluffy and whatever, kind of like, you know, it's a little overused these days, talk about self-care and self-love. But I also think it's because we don't really understand what that means. And you said it so beautifully, when you understand yourself at this deep, like spiritual level, like that's where the true self-love comes from. And because I think when you see yourself in this way, there's just a level of, and I'm saying this from experience, of compassion for yourself and understanding. And for me, it was like putting all these pieces together, like the understanding part, like why I do certain things, and these pieces that I really wanted to shove down and push aside, but it's like being able to accept those. So I love that you said that, because I think that this is the perfect tool for this, because this is looking at it from this like energetic spiritual way of using it as a tool for self-love and really understanding yourself in a totally different way.
Wow, that's really touching how you put it. Yes, you know, I use this kind of analogy when I try to explain the chakra types in terms of self-love, and that is when we look at nature. For instance, when we look at giraffes, you never have even the thought that why is this giraffe not an elephant? You see, you would never look at it and think that this kind of very bizarre thought. And you would never do the same with elephants, right? You would never think, oh, why is this animal so heavy and so big, or whatever? Why does it? And so on. So, but when we look at ourselves, and also when we look at others, all of a sudden the giraffe seems to need to transform into an elephant, and vice versa. And that is exactly when we begin to understand that each of us has an innate design that is not supposed to change, essentially. And sometimes we begin to think of our limitations, so an over-focus on our limitations. I'm not like this, or I'm not like other people, I'm not enough. And that is only because we don't understand the beauty of that kind of pattern, including its so-called limitations. The limitations are not disadvantages. Actually, they point at the gifts, the unique gifts that we naturally have. So when we begin to embrace that kind of perspective, first of all, we learn to experience not only self-love, but what I call quiet confidence. And quiet confidence is a state in which you no longer need to defend yourself. You don't need to tell others, this is who I am, you have to accept me. You don't have to scream to be recognized because you recognize yourself. Oh, that's what I am.
That's me.
And these are my gifts. And actually, I encourage people, readers in the book, to create a strength list, comprising all the different gifts that appear in their their three chakra types. And when you create that kind of list, you're amazed, because that's such a long list and you've never been even aware of how abundant your being is.
Right.
So, and that is also something that we need, that kind of acknowledgement we need to turn toward others around us, because as soon as we learn to be who we are, rather than being told who we should be, either by ourselves or by others, we also begin to cultivate that kind of precious compassion. We learn to look at this person and think, this is a giraffe, or this is an elephant, or this is a butterfly, or this is a flower, and this is exactly how it's meant to be. So that's key. When we need to balance ourselves, balance our excesses, balance or compensate for some deficiencies, that's only when we begin to experience that our system has become somewhat self-destructive. When it has this kind of overflowing nature that begins to become self-destructive or destructive toward others, toward relationships, that is something that we need to balance. But other than that, we're perfect as we are, our limitations included.
Yes, I love that. I mean, you said it so perfect. And I think that's where tools, like this, and there's others, whatever works for you, but I think that's where, when you can look at yourself from this spiritual perspective, I love what you said about the quiet confidence. I think that's so perfect. It's like, just like, this is me. Like, you don't have to not have to defend yourself. And I think all of us want that, to not have to defend our values and our opinions and our, who we are, all of that. I think all of us want that, but I think that it definitely takes a deep sense of self-awareness, and that, just that introspective perspective of life, to be able to have that quiet confidence like you're talking about. Because the other thing that which leads me to my next question, the other thing I wanted to ask you, and you mentioned this kind of at the beginning, but you were saying that the primary and the secondary sometimes can have this conflict, the chakra, the primary chakra and the secondary. So can you tell us, like, how that would show up in the body? Like, what's happening when those things are at odds, and then how do we reconcile that?
Yes, that's a very important point. Well, that kind of, first of all, I think one of the gifts of this system is that we learn to trace back our inner conflicts, our inner voices. When we have different voices pulling in different directions, we begin to trace these back to our different chakra types.
Mhm.
Because and the greatest quarrel is taking place between our primary type and our secondary type, and that is where we need to learn to be very attentive, because this actually holds a great key. Let me give you an example. I have in my own constellation, I have as my primary type the third eye. Now, the third eye is all about research, philosophy. You are happy to be alone in a room with books and your thoughts for a whole week. You would not even notice that you've been alone, or that you've forgotten to eat or whatever. You just don't care, because you're just so satisfied with your learning and exploration and how much you can learn. But then my secondary type, that's where it begins to become both harmonious or complementary, but also conflicted, is my throat chakra type. Now, the throat chakra type is very extroverted. It's all about charismatic influence. It's all about sharing, manifesting, dream pursuing, vision, and educating others. Now, the very intriguing point is that if I pursue the throat chakra type and I fall into its set of values rather than my primary type, I would feel actually quite dissatisfied after some time. You see, I would be able to express myself in the world. Perhaps I would become, I don't know, world famous. But strangely, unlike other people say, that kind of fame would lead me to frustration. So unless I remind myself to return to that kind of pursuit, to this kind of soul nourishment, I would not be happy or would not be in touch with my meaning. So this is where we begin to answer our own dilemmas. You see, whenever we feel that we're unhappy, we can trace that kind of unhappiness to not being settled in our primary chakra type, and sometimes to not being aligned with our fulfillment secondary type, because that is also crucial, and sometimes because we simply haven't nourished ourselves by tapping into our supportive type. If you see, some people have as their supportive type, for instance, the crown chakra type. And that implies that if they want to nourish themselves, the only way they can do that is through spiritual retreat, silence, meditation, and connection with the divine. So if they don't do that for enough time, they would begin to feel depleted, burn out. They would experience burnout. So that is a very essential way in which I begin to ask myself, why am I unhappy? Why is it that I feel out of touch with my essence? I may even be involved with the greatest projects and please everyone around me, and still feel that kind of hole inside my chest, like, no, that's still not happiness.
Something's
That's
missing.
still not meaning. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I love that example, because I think it also, I have conversations like this with my clients all the time. We're talking about their human design, but I think like your example illustrates so well how you have to take care of you first. Because it's like, if you're doing all this like outward stuff, like through your throat chakra, if I'm only putting out, but I'm not starting with this and going in first, then you're depleted. So I know a lot of times, especially for women who are listening to the show, it's, we're all about like, give to everybody else first and sacrifice ourselves. And I got to do everything for everybody else. But I think your example was so perfect, where and I know it gets cliche with the whole, like, put your oxygen mask on first. But I think this is a perfect example of that, of if I'm only putting out and I'm not pouring in first, then, and that, because that does create tension. And I've worked with so many women who are experiencing burnout, exactly like you're talking about, because they're now, granted, I don't know, because I haven't had them do this quiz, which I feel like this is a good resource I can give my clients now. But it's just that inner conflict of, well, I haven't, whatever it is that needs to fulfill me, I'm not doing that first.
Yes. that's where I'm beginning to hear the whisper of my soul telling me what it means to pursue my truest passion. Because that's the key term. There are passions. Passions are those inclinations that are ingrained in us, that when we follow them, these are the moments in our lives that we would remember as the happiest and the most meaningful. You see, let me give you an example, the heart chakra type. For the heart chakra type, and I think perhaps some of our listeners are belong to that kind of lovely category. So the heart chakra type would would think of their most important, most meaningful moments in life as related to something to do with relationships, intimacy, experiences of oneness, perhaps even with nature or the divine, or with other people. But they would always feel that kind of longing for the sense of completeness and wholeness through some sense of profound intimacy. But, and this perhaps relates to what you just said before, the heart chakra type is also highly dependent. You see that because each type has a certain overflowing tendency. We become too much of ourselves, and then we begin to experience certain excesses, certain imbalances. So the heart chakra type has this kind of tendency of never being fully one with itself, because it's so focused on the other, especially the other half, and their mind is heavily occupied with relationships. They always think about people, how to satisfy them, how to sacrifice themselves even more to make other people happy, because they really are invested in other people's happiness. So that is extraordinarily beautiful. But on the other hand, that makes them always feel somewhat desperate for recognition, sometimes over-sacrificing themselves, leaving themselves behind, and not being in tune with that kind of love that they're supposed to be in touch with, rather than receive. So that's when the heart chakra type needs to go through a whole process of learning what it means to be whole, to be independent, emotionally independent, and to be a source rather than a needy or hypersensitive individual. So this is exactly where we learn to begin to listen to ourselves and to enjoy that beautiful part of being a heart chakra type, for instance, which are always lovely personalities, really comfortable to be with, very nourishing, but also to avoid those troubling excesses.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it's just like everything else, right? And when you're looking at the chakras, there is such a thing as like too much energy, right? Like too much from that. So that makes total sense, having kind of that like shadow side of what's going on in that chakra. So as we start to wrap up here, because I could talk about this all day, as we start to wrap up here, I guess one last question of how we can really, I mean, you've given a lot of really great examples of how we can implement this, but in terms of like using this as a tool for emotional healing, like what can you give our listeners just in terms of how to really implement this and embody this in our lives and help with emotional healing and growing and evolving as a human?
Well, when we learn to identify our primary chakra type, and again, that is quite easily done through just the quiz. We can actually attach the link perhaps below the interview. Perfect. Because that's online available. So that's easily achievable. So there is we also tap into our specific kind of shadow work. Shadow work means that kind of fear or something that we try to hide away, or our special kind of concealment that is unavoidable in terms of our primary type. So each primary type has their shadow work. But what is very important to understand is that by pinpointing your shadow work, your specific one, you finally discover the roots of your tree of suffering or confusion or conflict with life and with yourself. So instead of what people always do is that they keep working on many different branches of that tree, trying to cut off this branch or that branch and to take care of the top of the tree, instead of just working on one life theme. So when we understand that we have only one major life theme to tend to work on, to transform, that is so incredibly helpful in terms of energy preserving way of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also a much more focused therapy, self-therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, focusing on that. That's very true. I love how you put that. That's very true. That makes total sense. So, but aside from taking the quiz, obviously that's the first step, is taking the quiz to determine these. What would be like the next 2 to 3 steps for people and really like learning this and being able to implement it?
Well, in terms of the system, that's, I think the book is more than enough. It gives you work for for years to come. Aside from that, there's also a course that I'm teaching. That's a professional training, especially for therapists and coaches. That is titled Chakra-Informed Therapy and Coaching. So this you can find on my website, shaitubali.com. So that's a very comprehensive kind of process, because it's important to understand that the chakra personality types are just one method among many others that I've developed along the way related to chakras, because I'm, like you, so in love with the chakras and with their developmental potential.
Yes, yes. That's so good. I love it. And of course, go get the book. And like Dr. Shai just said, there's work for years to come just in the book. So I think that's great. And I can't wait to see what else you come out with, because again, I mean, I could study this stuff and learn about it all day. So I'm excited to see what else you come up with. And of course, I'll have links to all that in the show notes. I'll put the link to his website and the quiz and where to get the book and all those things. The last question I want to ask you, that I like to ask everyone to finish. What do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
To live with purpose? Well, I would say that it is to find my unique kind of happiness, not based on all kinds of best-selling self-help books that prescribe one happiness for everyone, but really getting in touch with what makes me feel nourished and satisfied, regardless of social expectations or social definitions of what happiness is. Because very often we define purpose in very limited ways. I think that in our society, you need to become an influencer, a success. You have to become world renowned in something, or you need to be very rich, or you need to have lasting relationships, or all that, or a family. And actually, happiness and purpose, they are very individual, and sometimes they're found in very unexpected ways and forms. So accept that your type of happiness may be something that is that satisfies your soul, but has nothing to do with social values. Be a rebel.
I love that. I love that. That was such a great answer. And I think I think that's something really profound for people to contemplate. It's funny you say that, because I had a conversation with a mentor of mine last week in this kind of group call that we had, talking about that, how so often we think that our purpose has to be about everybody else, but that's not necessarily true for everybody. And I think if we can accept that, if we have a quote unquote like selfish purpose, right, that's still benefiting the collective because you're playing the piece of the puzzle that you're designed to play. So it's going to benefit the collective, whether it's about everybody else or about you. So I love that you said that.
Exactly. Like even the smallest flower, the flower that nobody notices has a function and significance in the greater design. That is what we need to understand. We don't need to be a giant tree.
Yes. Yes.
Noticeable by everyone.
Yes. I love that. This was such a great conversation, Dr. Shai. Thank you for this, for all of your research and that you're putting into this, the books and everything. This is so insightful. And I know that people are there's so much opportunity for growth for people and just starting to implement this. So thank you. And thanks for spending your time with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been incredible to meet you and have this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you.